All right, we're live. Folks, I'll give it a few minutes for other attendees to join, or less than a few minutes, but I'll give it a second for other attendees to join, and then we will get started.
Hello, everybody. I hope you all are having a good start to your week. If you want, you can chat with us in the comments section. We can answer some questions as well. Take some questions at the end of the presentation.
Definitely. All right, that's about 45 seconds in, so we will kick off. Hey, folks, I'm Nick Ascoli. I'm a senior product strategist at Flare, as well as a member of our threat research team. And with me today is Tammy Harper. Today's webinar is a part of a series we've been doing on different topics concerning the cybercrime underworld and the dark web. We've discussed forums, we've discussed Telegram, info stealers, and all manner of interesting things. The topic of today's webinar is ransomware. What's going on with the ransomware world? Who are the new players? What are some interesting things and novel things that we've observed here at Flare? And while previous episodes have been sort of a group effort, Tammy is really our go-to expert for all things ransomware. So she'll be leading the charge today. We may chime in occasionally or have conversational bits, but you can expect to get a masterclass in ransomware today from Tammy Harper. So Tammy, if you want to introduce yourself quickly, and then we'll get into the slides.
Thank you very much, Nick. You are way too kind. Hi, everybody. My name is Tammy Harper. I am the Senior Threat Intelligence Researcher here at Flare. And as it was mentioned, my specialty is ransomware, emerging threat groups, and pretty much anything in that world. So there was a lot that's happened in the past 6 months when it comes to ransomware. And some might say that we're pretty much witnessing the perhaps the Cambrian explosion of ransomware right now. So what essentially happened 6 to 10 months ago, Alpha-V, Alpha-V, and Lockbit were disrupted. So essentially, this caused a massive power vacuum in the ecosystem because Lockbit was number one, Alpha-V was number two, and essentially when they were disrupted, the affiliates, the actual hackers or the attackers that are part of these groups had to find a new home. And they have the technical level of ability to create their own groups, or they could also just join new groups. So in the past 6 months, we've really just seen a massive wave of new groups. You can go to the next slide. There we go. So in the past 6 months, we've seen a massive wave of new groups. So we've seen Brain Cipher, we've seen groups like Dragon Force rebuild their offering. Their complete ransomware has been rebuilt. We've seen new groups as well. We've seen Lynx, which is a group that has been deemed a rebrand of Ink Ransom. A few months ago, we saw Ink Ransom's source code go up for sale, and this was for around $300,000. And essentially, we're seeing Link really capitalize on this. They're using the exact same encryption methods. They're using the old Ink Ransom DLS template, and also methods and mannerisms are very similar. We're seeing new groups that are really capitalizing on old folklore from the early 2010s, so like Cicada 3301, making it really difficult to do research on, because every time you do research on Cicada 3301, you always end up finding things about what happened a decade ago. So this is really interesting, really interesting group. Eldorado, which is a group that's been around surprisingly for a long time until just recently when the DLS was made public. So we were seeing this DLS for months before it was public. And also Fog, which is really, really interesting. They're a brand new group. They've been around for a few months. Trinity, Ransom Hub has had a massive revamp as well, and we were going to discuss this in more detail. And we're just seeing new groups like Hell Down Leaks, just like this past week has come out, and we're seeing new groups like Hexalocker, Double Face, CyberVault are all standalone encryptors for Windows. So these are all groups that have affiliations with like Lapsus and are basically working on starting to branch out into ransomware, or just diversifying their from going from DDoS and defacement to ransomware now. So we have a lot of groups that are coming out, and we're going to go to the next slide.
Actually, there's an interesting question. There's actually two things in the chat. DW said Cicada 3301. Really? Yes. Funny you should point that out. Like Tammy said, a surprising, not a rebrand of the old Cicada, just kind of stealing the brand. And then JJ asked, do the groups operate strictly in the ransomware space? I've seen F Society as a group name in some phishing kits, and I'm wondering if it's coincidence. So that's also a good question. You'll notice another name on here that you've seen before, not in the ransomware space, Null Bulge, and there might even be others. You're right. There are several of these groups do things, maybe in phishing kits, maybe in exploit kits, or in like public extortion or leaking that are not traditionally associated with the ransomware space. There's just also evidence, like tertiary evidence, that they're using maybe the leaked Lockbit program as a part of their operations, or indeed have like recently launched a data leak site or something. So there are a lot of these groups are cross-functional. Tammy, would you want to
absolutely add? And a lot of these, so for example, recently we saw a new group. Well, it's more of a single actor called Cloak.su, or Leak Locker, aka Leak Locker. Cloak.su was basically advertising to sell their source code on Ramp. They were also trying to capitalize and market this source code. They had no affiliation with Cloak, the other ransomware group. They just shared the name, Cloak.su. Cloak, very, very similar. A lot of researchers were wondering, are they affiliated? Are they connected? Another thing is, for example, BrainCipher. BrainCipher is actually a defacement kit. There's, I think we believe at version 8 right now. And but this has nothing to do with BrainCipher, the ransomware group. So we're seeing a lot of groups reuse names. F Society, of course, is inspired, and especially the dedicated leak site, the data leak site, is heavily inspired by Mr. Robot. So we're really seeing groups reuse and take over brand names. So what we're seeing now is really, since there's a massive void to fill, groups are trying to capitalize on this vacuum to get into the space. And what better way to do this than to reuse source code? So we're seeing a lot of groups use Babook. We're seeing a lot of groups use Lockbit Black Builder or LLBB for short. And basically, this is allowing them to really put like a head start on their coding, and they're also leveraging malicious GTP models to help them rewrite and write their own variants of ransomware. So these are a bunch of new groups that have been seen operating, and they're all leveraging Leak Lockbit Black Builder. This research was conducted by another researcher, and we have a verify, and you can visit the article there. Very, very informative. So we can go to the next slide. So in recent news, and this all ties into Leak Lockbit Black Builders, the Radar and Dispossessor disruption. So these groups were basically seized. There was a lot of information out there saying that they were ex-Lockbit affiliates, but the group's been around for a while. We've seen this group as in around Q3 of 2023. And so this was before the Operation Kronos that the law enforcement leveraged against Lockbit. So this is not some affiliate or a group of affiliates that basically left during that disruption. And so this is a group of potentially of people who were just downloading data, massive amounts of data from Lockbit, and putting it up for sale again. So Dispossessor was not very much liked within the ransomware community. It was not very much liked by individuals who may have already been able to settle their ransom claim and then have to worry about their information being repackaged and resold on another platform. So Radar and Dispossessor also had around 44 unique victims to their names between the two groups. They're basically the same. It's just an offshoot of each other. And so out of like 1,000 victims that they were recycling, only 44 were unique to them, which is a very, very interesting metric. We can go to the next slide.
I wanted to talk about some comments from the chat. Olivier said animated radar, law enforcement got swag. Indeed. And they're also being funny here. They've got the animated radar one. And then in the other one, they say that the website has been repossessed, which is kind of like a dig at Dispossessor, because they were just like, a lot of the leaks, law enforcement had already seized the servers of whatever the group was that originally produced that leak in the first place. So it's kind of a dig. And then JJ asks, and this is a really good question, do ransomware groups operate mostly on the dark web or also on the clear web? For example, phishing groups recruit operators on clear web forums as well. Absolutely, yes. Ransomware operators also recruit affiliates from clear web forums. Tammy, you want to elaborate?
Yeah, so clear web forums and dark web forums. So for example, breach forums is a forum that operates on via Onion and also primarily over clear web. So we're seeing that, but most of the recruitment actually is done on the deep web, which is not necessarily the dark web, but in between the clear web and the dark web. So this deep web, we're talking about Discord, we're talking about Telegram, we're talking about instant messaging platforms that are not indexed by Google or any other search engines. Predominantly Telegram right now is becoming the prime area for advertisements of new groups, advertisements of programs, and basically new malware. And basically this is where you can conduct your interview, and you can go in and say, hey, I want to join your group, and these are my credentials, this is what I have to offer, what are the splits? Well, we can basically, a split is how much of the ransomware are we going to split, and then basically you start to join private groups, and then from there you can see who they're targeting, who are they, how their techniques and their tactics and their procedures are evolving over time. So really, we're seeing a more and more of a focus on the deep web than on clear web, but absolutely recruitment happens on the clear web as well.
Yeah, I saw Barry in the chat said most still operate and recruit on XSS. Yep. And a lot of the clear web, well, and all these places we're talking about for the most part have a clear web, link and have a dark web mirror. So like you can get to them through Onion or from the clear web. A lot of the forums have attempted in the past to squash this kind of conversation, but it still slips by moderators on a lot of the forums. And some of the forums care a lot less than others. Okay, BrainCypher.
So BrainCypher, as we mentioned before, is one of the groups that has first been seen leveraging the leaked Lockbit block builder. And so in June, they targeted one of the, they targeted CumInfo. CumInfo is a huge temporary national data center in Indonesia. The group also is suspected of leveraging CVE 2023-28252, which is the Windows Common Log File System Driver elevation of privilege vulnerability. And this was a vulnerability that was previously used by another group called Nokoyawa. Nokoyawa has connections to Nevada, which is defunct, but also is a sister site to Snatch. So Snatch and Nokoyawa haven't been around for a few months now. And Nokoyawa disbanded and defunct in 2023, but Snatch up until recently, only a few months ago, as they basically disappeared. So this research is really, Rakesh Krishnan was the researcher that pointed this out. So hat tip to you. And from there, BrainCypher was able to start accumulating more victims. So we're at about 9 victims right now on their dedicated leak site. And which is really interesting is how they approach their whole negotiation and their marketing, quote unquote, campaigns. So we can go to the next slide. So basically, the CumInfo incident happened really quickly. If you think about like time span of an incident, so for example, CumInfo first detected a malicious activity on their network on the 17th of June, and then 3 days later, they declared that there was a breach. Now, also, BrainCypher has basically stated and claimed that they had access to and stolen hundreds of terabytes of data. So again, this is a group that is extremely not maybe extremely well, but more, I would say, quick. They're very, very fast in terms of processing and pivoting from action to action to action. So what we're seeing is that in the span of 2 weeks, the whole incident was resolved. So from the 17th, when they first detected Windows Defender being deactivated, to the 3rd of July, roughly 20 days later, the whole process was taken care of. So from negotiations to failed negotiations, because BrainCypher tried to monetize this incident, but ultimately ended up releasing the decryption keys for free, and which was really, really interesting that they did that. They've stated that they would never do that again, and that this was not something that was pressured upon them to do. This was more of an internal decision to do, and they've pivoted this whole incident into an advertisement campaign for themselves. Now, talking about incidents and advertising, you can go to the next slide. Basically, BrainCypher has also offered to advertise on their dedicated leak site. So $100,000 in Monero for a week of advertisement versus $200,000 for a month of advertisement on their platform, which is pretty interesting because they must have seen so much traffic when their dedicated leak site onion was made public by researchers. They must have seen so much traffic that they must be like, okay, we can probably monetize our web space, our web pages, which is pretty interesting, like a metric to think about, like how much these websites are visited. So that is just a statistic that I found very, very interesting. Let's go on to the next group. So we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about their victimology. So the victimology is really focused around the United States, which makes sense. The United States are very well-funded companies. They most likely have disposable income and insurance to pay for incidents like this. And also the distribution of industries is really fascinating because you have the financial sector is what's targeted the most, which makes sense because of how sensitive the data information is there. But we only have 9 victims so far. So really like creating a detailed victimology and like what BrainCypher really likes to target and prefers to target is something that we're going to have to continue to monitor and to see evolve over time. But the group has been targeting Israel, has been targeting Indonesia, which is outside of the standard Western world. So like Europe and North America. But besides that, they're targeting Portugal, they're targeting Venezuela, which is in South America. And so this is pretty much a standard. We're seeing like a good picture of their victimology and what they like to target. We'll go on to the next slide. So Dragon Force is an old group. They've been around since November of 2023. But recently, they've had a rebrand. So when they first started off, they had a dedicated, they were using the LeakLockBit Black Builder. So when they first started off, they were posting pretty much exclusively on breach forums. And they were posting, they were using breach forums as their dedicated leak site. So they would say, here's the victim. This is what, like the exact same posting, the exact same posting method that they would use later on their blog. They would basically just use breach forums as their platform. And they would offer a single onion link. This link was to their file server, which is was, interestingly enough, had very little fingerprint or footprint of web applications and web technologies being used. So this is a group that really, really values a low fingerprint. And even if you go on their website today, there's a lot of technology at play, but there's very little fingerprint that can be enumerated from their platform, which shows, again, sophistication and meticulous attention to detail. And we'll get back to that when we explore their affiliate page and their affiliate panels. So on June 26, 2024, this is when Dragonforce really offered and stepped up and said, hey, we're offering a brand new operation right now. So this comes again, these are groups that are fighting for affiliates. They're fighting to promote themselves. And basically there's a lead time that happens when, because it was in March that really Alpha V fell. And from there you saw there's a lot of groups that were competing for work. So if you think about like how like the development cycle of software happens, there's a bit of a lag time. So we're going to basically be able to see this lag happen in real time and which group was able to capitalize and make their lag time smaller. So Dragonforce basically presented this new locker. This new locker allows them from their panel on the Onion site to basically start to establish what the revenue shares are going to be, what how the private keys are going to be handled. So essentially what's really interesting is that if negotiations fail, they can basically say that the private keys will be automatically deleted on the panel with no directly from the panel when the timer runs out. So that's interesting because a lot of the times we hope that if the timer runs out, we can like, so this actually adds to the notoriety and to the like how much to the credibility of this group. Now knowing that this information is out there, that when the timer runs out, the private keys can be deleted. It doesn't mean they will be because it is an option, but this is something that they can actually enforce. So this is a really interesting development in terms of what their lockers can do. So this is Dragonforce V2 that we're seeing. This is a wrestling new revamp of their group. So when we're looking at their affiliate panel, we can see and we can add individual companies, we can add individual, and then we can basically assign these victims to specific members of our team, because we can have team management. And we can basically say, okay, we want to basically allow this group and this team to negotiate and to deal with this company, and we basically from there you can post directly to the blog, and from after that you can basically migrate and move all the data, exfiltrated data that you have. So Dragonforce, again, all of this is done with a very minimal, very clean source code and very minimal fingerprints when you're exploring the web application technology. So this is basically when you're creating your victims, you're basically saying like, okay, I want to share, this is how much revenue they have, this is how much data we have, and you're basically able to really create your dedicated leak site post. We can go to the next one. So Dragonforce has, since they've been around longer, we have a more detailed victimology about them. So Dragonforce, for example, is able to well, really targets the United States. They target the United Kingdom and Australia, Argentina, Canada, Italy. So that top five is really standard, and there's nothing like that really like sticks out. And they really like to target manufacturing, and they exfiltrate a lot of data from manufacturing. And they exfiltrate a lot of data from construction, and construction is there's a number 2 most targeted industry. So, unlike BrainCipher, which targeted financial services most so far out of 9 victims, Dragonforce does not tend to do that. They tend to target manufacturing more. So exploring and understanding groups' victimologies and how they and who they target is really interesting. So now we're going to go talk to, and we're going to go look at Ransom Hub, who again, because of the disruption between AlphaV and Lockbit, have been really trying to capitalize on their momentum, and also have been trying to attract and make the most attractive affiliate program out there. So Ransom Hub has a ransom split, for example, of 90-10, which is one of the highest ransom splits out there on the market today. So it means 90% of the ransom goes to the affiliate, and 10% of the ransom goes to the development and admin and basically Ransom Hub, which makes it extremely attractive for groups and affiliates to want to join a Ransom Hub. So Ransom Hub, as a ransom as a service, provides the entire platform, the entire infrastructure, and basically allows groups to just leverage their platform to conduct attacks. So Ransom Hub has been around since February of 2024, and they've really exploded in popularity since the disruption. Now, it's also important to say that Ransom Hub basically came out of Knight and Cyclops, which was another RAS that wasn't as successful as Ransom Hub is today. But this is just what you can see when you have a good strategy, a good product, and you capitalize on when the number one and number two basically vacate their position in the leaderboard. So we can go to the next slide. So on, and this is what where we're talking about taking advantage of basically developing your platform for and taking advantage of when the other groups basically leave their position. So they built it on April 6th. They built a new locker. They updated their previous locker. So this added a whole bunch of new features, and it really showed a commitment to ongoing development of their locker. Now, these updates came from very aggressively from March all the way to basically May. So, and we saw one more update in June. But since then, the updates have stopped, or they're not as advertised publicly anymore. So the new locker leverages AES 256. It's written in Golang and uses Garble as for obfuscation. It also is able to perform encryption in safe mode or offline. And recently, Ransom Hub v2 has said that their encryptor now can be done and executed remotely, which is really, really interesting, meaning that you don't have to leave a file on the victim's network anymore. It can be conducted remotely, which is really fascinating. So the new locker variant that we're exploring right now, which has been basically alluded to in terms of updates from April and March, was first spotted and observed by Palo Alto's Unit 42 on July 24th. So there's a few months of lag time, but we are seeing that these new groups are putting a lot of effort in development and competing really aggressively for their affiliates, for new affiliates. So Ransom Hub is the number one group right now, and they have an extensive victimology. So right now, their top targeted country is the United States, and very interestingly, unlike the other groups where the countries that they're attacking sort of make sense, Ransom Hub is really, really keen on attacking Brazil. And it is their number two most targeted country. And this sticks out because there's not another group out there as sophisticated a Ransom Hub that is targeting Brazil as hard. The only other group really that comes to mind that has been around in this new Cambrian explosion of ransomware recently is Quilong, and they were targeting specifically plastic surgery clinics in Brazil. But Ransom Hub has said that they do not allow attacks on CIS, which 99% of ransomware groups out there say they do not allow. And so this is the Commonwealth of Independent States, which is basically a group of nations, ex-Soviet and ex-USSR nations that you're not allowed to target. They also say you're not allowed to target Cuba, They also say you're not allowed to target North Korea and China. And interestingly, when Ransomware first appeared on the map, they did not allow to target Romania, but this has been removed. They allow Romanian companies now to be targeted. So that's really interesting for in terms of victimology. And if we go to the next slide, we can also see that in terms of what and how successful ransomware is, they have one of the highest that we've been able to calculate of posts that are removed from their platform. So what that means is, for example, if you have a company, you announce, you publicly declare and claim a victim on your post on their dedicated leak site, you then remove that victim because you're undergoing negotiations or the victim has paid. This could help and lead to basically saying that around 13%, give or take, of victims are paying Ransomware, which is a massive metric. So again, it's not exactly a perfect science because ransomware could basically remove a victim and not receive payment, which is unlikely but possible. But at the same time, this is a pretty staggering amount of victims being posted and then removed, which could indicate how successful they are. So with all of these attacks that Ransomware is conducting, over time, they are conducting more and more attacks. And also, at the same time, they are exfiltrating more and more data. So Ransomware is a group that exfiltrates a lot of data. And we're seeing posts in the terabyte. We're seeing posts in the like hundreds of gigabytes. There's posts that say just too much data to be to actually be calculated, which is hilarious. But they're really, really heavy on exfiltration. And what's interesting as well, from basically an investigator's perspective, is that they make it very difficult to download the data off of their free file servers. They implement a lot of restrictions. They implement CAPTCHA. They implement basically DDoS protection. So yes, the information is available to be browsed because it's basically a JS file manager, basically that you can just like click and browse. But actually downloading that data in any bulk and any meaningful, effective way is basically not possible off of Ransom Hub. And so this basically negates their highly offensive and their credibility in terms of like, we will leak all of this information, but actually leaking the information is very difficult. So that's a very interesting thing because it also leads to how expensive, because it wasn't always like that. Before they hot linked all the archives, but now they don't do that anymore. So it could basically lead to, is it too expensive to host? Is it like there's other groups that are starting to, because the bad guys have to pay for hosting. They have to pay for all of this infrastructure as well. So it really, you can start to ask the question of like, how are they hosting all of this and where are they hosting it? And like, there's a whole bunch of questions and really interesting theories that you can start to pull on. So that's really interesting. We can go to the next slide. Yeah.
Cool. There's a lot of questions. So we will go to the chat now, but thanks, Tammy. That was awesome. Super educational. Okay, starting from where we left off, Tim Carpenter asked, has any of these new identified RAS groups been sharing recruitment tactics with nation-state-sponsored APT groups? For example, Lockbit was classified as a private group, but shared resources and was funded by the Russian SVR. I mean, Tammy, I'll let you take this. I'll just give a few comments on it first. But the recruitment tactics have been largely, at least in a lot of the groups we talked about, like the classic XSS and ramp style recruitments that we would expect with a lot of private conversation happening in places that Tammy talked about, like Telegram, where there's not as much These aren't forums necessarily, and they're less so public conversations, though the invitations can be made public in the Telegram group. The sort of like thread that unites all suspicion of Russian SVR funding to a ransomware group is when a group doesn't target CIS countries. But that is so many groups that the like water of who may be funded or not is always muddy. The evidence, it's always sort of attempts. It's like it can be conjecture to try and assume that one is and one isn't when they're both not targeting CIS countries. Sometimes it doesn't pass the sniff test when a group suddenly becomes extremely sophisticated with their own locker and a ton of victims really, really fast. You tend to think these are either very experienced ex-affiliates, ex-operators who are starting from scratch to avoid being arrested or persecuted by global law enforcement, or possibly they've got some ulterior funding. So, Tim, it's kind of hard to say. Tammy, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, so I've explored this concept of APTs and like how they fit into the equation of basically the threats that we're seeing from cyber criminals. So my understanding and how I see it is in countries like specifically like Russia, for example, you can have a company that is an operating business, and you could be recruited or officially, unofficially by the state to offer your services. These could be hosting, these could be pretty much anything from offensive capabilities to providing DDoS protection for specific websites. And so there's a difference between being nation state sponsored, which is we mostly associate with intelligence services and military services, like openly and overtly sponsoring your actions and helping you target, versus what I like to look at it this way is these are more like groups that are they're state-sponsored organized crime, or even basically just sponsored organized crime, and maybe not even a state-sponsored capability, but more of a mercenary perspective of like, we are a company that can offer these services and we do it. There are companies like this in every country. And the state, and I mean the government of these countries will rely on these companies for their expertise in specific matters. So this is a really interesting, like, I'm not saying that that's what exactly what LogBit is, but we're seeing like the definition of APT is getting more and more nebulous over time as more and more people get into the field.
Awesome. Thanks for that answer, Tammy. Ricardo asks, good morning, everyone. Good morning, Ricardo. Have you discovered some groups using networks like YGG, Drizzle, or similar, which is that's like a P2P network that's fairly new, I think? I understand the majority are present in .onion sites, but are they exclusive to that service? Well, if you look at a lot of law enforcement seizures, like the Dispossessor one, if you look at the links that were seized in them, a lot of them are clear web. So like, yes, they are present on .onion, but a lot of DLS sites have clear web mirrors where the entirety of the leak contents can also be accessed without a Tor browser, without the need for the onion protocols at all. And, the standard web protocols you would assume are in place to access the leaked data.
Yeah. So in terms of onion hunting, what I like to do is it's a really multifaceted operation, and it's time consuming, and it really takes. So the best network to find onions is through your researcher network. Really, hey, do you have this onion? Hey, I heard about this group. Do you have this? Do you have that? The number one best way to source new onions. Then the next best way is actual hunting. Now, there's different ways of actually like finding new onions. So one of the more intensive ways of doing it is basically detonating new payloads. And when you're detonating these payloads in a controlled environment, you look at the ransom node, and then you can find the new block addresses. This is very time consuming. This is very resource hungry and intensive, but it will, if you're really like looking for the latest and greatest in terms of bleeding edge onions, this is one of the best ways to do it. The next method to do is if you have, for example, if you have the name or of the group, and someone has shared, for example, a screenshot or something like that, you can use certain elements on the web page to basically conduct a source code reverse search on platforms like HTML code on like Shodan, Census, FOFA, and basically you can find the actual links to there. You can basically, a lot of times how I find onions is by going through the IP address and then going into the onion. So by using these platforms. So this is because the platforms are misconfigured and these are always patched, and sometimes you just find dead IPs. But this is how you're basically able to, as someone who does threat intelligence research and threat intel hunting, this is one of the methods that you can find new onions and identify new ransomware groups.
Yep. Chol says, hope you're going to share slides after this presentation. Chol, if you want slides, reach out to Tammy or myself on LinkedIn, and we will send them to you. But also, this was recorded. I think it should stay up on some of the platforms that it was sent to. Matthew says, deleting private keys kind of removes extortion opportunities, though. Tammy, any comments on that? I think that was from, I can't remember which group, but.
Right. So that's a very good, yes, I agree. It does remove the extortion of that particular victim, but it builds towards credibility, and it really cements the urgency to negotiate with that specific group. So, we always recommend using trained professionals when it comes to negotiating with threat actors. Threat actors are leverage their own professionals, so it is very important to not conduct a negotiation or attempt to negotiate with threat actors if you are not experienced in that, in terms of the legalities of it, in terms of the social engineering and just negotiation skills. But when you're using these law firms or even these negotiation services take meticulous notes of their interactions with threat actors. And what is interesting is that they could also, if a group starts to say, hey, we're negotiating, if the timer runs out, we will delete the keys. This becomes a trend that negotiation services and other, for example, professionals can basically say, okay, well, this increases the credibility of this group and the notoriety of this group and the threat of this group. That if we don't if we fail negotiations, this could lead, and it just basically, it's not for that specific victim. It really leads towards the credibility of the group overall. And I think that's a really interesting way they're doing it.
Indeed. Okay. Any other questions? Stuart, a question about Lockbit on the Ransom Hub V2 slide. Which was that? Let's V2. Maybe the locker.
It's
on the
locker.
Yeah.
So very good, very, very good question, Stuart. So I haven't been able to completely identify or understand how remote encryption works, because you would have to think that remote encryption is either CPU intensive on the local side, or it's got to be network heavy if you're doing remote. So is it something that is conducted during exfiltration, or is it something that is conducted So like when you're basically exfiltrating your data, is it first like exfiltrating then encrypting, or is it encrypting and then exfiltrating? So it's a really interesting, when does that happen, like a part of the kill chain. I am definitely open to more information about that, and I would love to see more information about that come out in the next few weeks when researchers get their hands on more of their indicators of compromise that leverage this technique.
Awesome. All right, I'm scrolling through for more questions. Yeah, Stuart, it is interesting. And remote IEX is, I think, a safe suspicion, right? Like popular download Gradle. But I think that's it. I don't see any more questions. Thank you all. We'll hang out for a minute in case there are more, but thank you all so much for tuning in. We really appreciate you guys joining us. I hope the information was valuable, insightful, and interesting. And if you have any questions about this research or about what we do at Flare, please reach out to Tammy or myself, and we'd be happy to discuss. So thanks again, and we'll see you on the next one.
Bye.